One of my teachers when I was first starting school said that Chinese medicine views the body as a garden and Western medicine views the body as a machine.
Hi everyone, I'm Kirsten Davidson, your host and creator of my wellness podcast, Mind the Gaps, where we work on surrendering our typical ways of looking at life to step out of our comfort zone and into our growth zone. Welcome to episode number 27, Ancient Healing in the Modern World, where I'm joined by Dr. Kevin Preston. Dr. Preston brings over 15 years of experience blending traditional Chinese medicine, quantum physics, and biological medicine to help thousands address the root causes of chronic illnesses and complex conditions. Known for his unconventional approach, he combines expertise in pattern recognition and holistic healing to uncover the mystery factors holding individuals back. Working with high-impact leaders, groups, and entrepreneurs, Dr. Preston empowers clients to achieve clarity, vitality, and their most authentic expression. Through private sessions, online programs, speaking engagements, and transformative retreats, he's passionate about sparking profound personal and professional transformation. To become a part of Dr. Preston's online community, be sure to follow him on Instagram at Dr. Kevin Preston and through his website, www.drkevinpreston.com. I'm excited to dive into today's conversation where Dr. Preston reveals how certain emotions are stored in different organs of the body and how through the lens of traditional Chinese medicine in context of the modern world, he adapts treatments to best suit the needs of individuals where they're at today. For all things Mind the Gaps, you can find me on Instagram at kirsten.davidson in addition to my new website, mindthegaps.co. If you like what you hear today, taking a moment to rate and review the podcast episode is always greatly appreciated. We couldn't do this without your support, so thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy. Hi, Kevin. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, grateful to be here. I'm excited to have a conversation with you.
I started off by asking Dr. Preston if he could share his insights on the unique approach he takes to traditional Chinese medicine.
There's a lot of depth to Chinese medicine. Acupuncture was where I really began my career and then really got into herbal medicine. And really actually the main focus, I would say, was still a Chinese medicine viewpoint is around toxicity and like working on viruses and bacteria and autoimmune conditions. And I love getting down to the deepest parts of the system that we can. And I still really love the lens of Chinese medicine. And that's actually given me a beautiful foundation to understand the body and then look at a lot more of the modern data that's available and kind of synthesize that together. So some of what I do is more like progressive Chinese medicine.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, because there's traditional Chinese medicine, and then I like how you're saying there's also progressive Chinese medicine. So we're going to dive in. I want to learn all about this. Would you mind sharing with us how you came to be in this role?
Yeah, it goes back a little ways. I think the short story is I had a lot of knee injuries, played hockey, many sports, lots and lots of injuries, lots of sports clinics, sports med doctors, physios, you name it. And after one of my knee surgeries, which had happened a couple of times, and right around kind of college hockey time, I had a full kind of ACL rebuild and a bunch of other damage in there because I like to do stuff thoroughly, And I got acupuncture after surgery and it worked beautifully. And that sparked an interest. I'm very curious. I like to understand things as much as I can. And I saw the results. I feel like I'm a very practical person too. And that was something I wanted to understand is how did that happen? Why am I feeling way better each time I get a treatment? I didn't grow up with acupuncture or anything like that. It was something that was super new and different to me. And I started reading books about it. And the more Chinese medicine literature that I would get a hold of and dive in with it, the more it made sense to me treating everybody individually, trying to get down to the root source of whatever it is that would be going on for somebody. And that's where it began. And I pivoted and took a left turn. I was in college at the time and taking science, and I thought I might go more the Western medicine route. And then fate had other ideas, or destiny, whatever we want to call it. And I took a leap into Chinese medicine and didn't entirely know what I was fully getting into, but it was powerful to just start peeling back the layers.
Amazing. And so how would you describe the core principles of traditional Chinese medicine? And then maybe explain to us, what do you mean by progressive Chinese medicine?
Yeah, traditional Chinese medicine, there's a lot of talk about the elements. We talk about the 5 elements, how that relates to nature, how it relates to the body. I've shared this many times in other speaking opportunities and podcasts that it's so relevant to me still that one of my teachers, when I was first starting school, said that Chinese medicine views the body as a garden and Western medicine views the body as a machine. And so those visuals and that analogy really made sense to me, and it landed deeper and deeper. And then after practicing for years, I would say that's more true than ever. So the whole system, as we talk about the microbiome now, and we talk about the inner ecosystems, all of it is connected, all of it is interrelated. And if you want a healthy, thriving garden, it needs water and sunlight and nutrients and, all the things that nature naturally does on its own. Like our bodies are trying to do that. And so that idea has really carried me through lots of treatments with people. It's informed my view of how to get down to the deeper parts of if there is an issue in there. And, I think there's that natural harmony. Chinese medicine uses the word harmony a lot. There's different categories of herbal formulas, and they're literally called harmonizing formulas. And they're meant to help smooth out the energy in the body, get the circulation better if there's anything stuck. Even on the mental emotional side, it's meant to help really return that beautiful flow through the system and find some level of balance, and really even at a physiological level in the system, the pH of the blood has to be in a pretty narrow range. And, the healthy inner environment, it has like a certain level of balance that it's needing, heartbeat, blood pressure, cholesterol, all the markers that we know of from a conventional point of view. Chinese medicine sort of has their own versions of that, of balance in the system, balance between the organs, balance between yin and yang. And we talk about qi, vital force, energy. And really at the end of the day, I think that's probably the core principle is keep the energy flowing harmoniously in the body as much as we can, and make sure you've got enough vital force, energy, and that all of the organs are connecting and communicating beautifully. And that leads to tremendous health. I think that is definitely something that I've seen through a different lens or a different perspective, probably because I did start in science and it was more like Western thought process. And I love human anatomy and the body and the muscles and the cells and neurology as well. Our brains are fascinating, and the whole nervous system is fascinating. So I was going in that direction. And then as I shifted into Chinese medicine and learning completely different concepts, I still remembered all the other things that I had learned prior. And then as I was nearing the end of Chinese medicine school and getting into the real world, as I started seeing, cases of mystery syndromes and autoimmune conditions and wanting to go deeper, I started reading about epigenetics. And I started looking into toxins and people talking about toxins and learning more about bacteria and learning more about viral issues and then parasites. And that led me down quite a rabbit hole to really understand the world that we live in more, and especially the modern world, because the amount of toxic exposure, toxins in general, compared to maybe 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago and beyond, is very different now. So if you think of like plastic wasn't invented a couple hundred years ago, or petroleum products of any kind, or 5G or, EMFs and things, like none of that was really around. There was other toxins for sure and things that you had to be mindful of. So we're living in a modern world. Something I've thought of, because we had to study a lot of the ancient classics in our Chinese medicine schooling. And some of those books are translated from like 2,000 years ago. And wow. I'd often imagined if I could have a conversation with the doctors of Chinese medicine from that era, and the knowledge and the wisdom that they had, and transport them to our everyday living now, looking at the different layers of toxic exposure through food, through air, through water, medications, you name it, alcohol, whatever. They're probably drinking back then too, rice wine and many, many other things, I'm sure, in China, and, distilling the finest of herbal formulas. But I'd love to have a conversation with them of saying, hey, I understand all the principles that you've shared. Thank you. That's incredible. And it's still very, very relevant today. Like some of those principles, I'm always blown away. I'm like, how did they figure that out? It's so beautiful and pure and very scientific, actually, and very deductive in terms of the reasoning of how to find disturbances and imbalances in the body. And, before Roundup and glyphosate and some of these things were invented, that, we have a lot of chemical laden foods and clothing and chemicals everywhere. How does that affect us in a modern day world? And how do those two worlds intersect of the ancient Chinese principles, but, still living on the planet as it is now? And, being really connected to technology and, blue light and all these things that are becoming more well-known and well understood, better than what they were 10 years ago of, that actually could affect us quite a bit. And it may not affect us in healthy ways. So how do we work with that? And so I've always kind of been leaning into very practical solutions, because at the end of the day, I just want people to feel healthy. I want them to have a lot of vitality in all of the levels, mentally, emotionally, physically. And I've just noticed through doing a deeper dive over many years that, the world around us can impact us in, really healthy ways, and then in lots of ways that may not be very helpful for the system. And so I kind of see the Chinese medicine in my life as a really powerful foundational, thought process and paradigm to work from, while also acknowledging the genetic shifts, the epigenetics, the way trauma may affect the cellular expression of the body, how that may turn on different signals in the system, how toxins and, fake hormones and plastics and all these different things that can kind of mimic environmental impact in our bodies, but take us in the wrong direction. And like, how do those really match up? How do they meet so that I can communicate that to people and effectively teach how to actually, pull ourselves out of that and what to watch for, while also still respecting a lot of the ancient principles that have stood the test of time.
Wow, what a fruitful answer. There's so many directions I want to go with that. You talk about the fact that we want to look at that ancient wisdom in context of modern culture now, right? And all the things we're exposed to now. And you made mention of, how does trauma impact our system? How do the things we're eating impact our system? So I see that there's this link, between the mental and physical, emotional through traditional Chinese medicine. How do you notice that emotions, or how are emotions believed to influence our physical body, and how are, the toxins in our environment thought of as influencing our physical body?
Maybe from a theoretical point of view, we'll dive in on that. And
Sure.
so in Chinese medicine, we talk about the yin organs. And the yin organs are the spleen, liver, heart, kidneys, and lungs. And each of those in Chinese medicine theory are connected to a different emotion. So this is the other thing I love about Chinese medicine, is they never really viewed them as separate, and that the physical structures, the physical organ function itself had a really vast influence on what was happening in the body, and the patterns of illness or the patterns of disease could be kind of traced through that. But what they also found, for example, and I can share each of them, the liver is connected with anger and frustration and like irritability. And one of the roles of the liver in Chinese medicine viewpoint is it helps govern all the emotions of the body and helps create like smooth flow and interconnectedness of each of those layers. And so the liver has a big role. So one of the modern day elements that can really impact that is the liver also filters out toxins. And it takes things that are toxic or harmful to the system, and it processes them and integrates them and turns them into particles and, elements basically in molecules that are not toxic. And then we'll push that through the digestion system, and the gallbladder has a role in that too. And of course, all the organs, but the liver is a major, major filter of how our body cleanses itself. So one of the ways we see this show up practically is that, maybe somebody's eating food that's not super healthy. And there's a lot of additives, preservatives, chemicals and synthetics and things. The liver's going to have to process that. Our digestion is going to have to process that. Over time, that might start creating congestion, or in Chinese medicine, they'd say like qi blockage in the liver. then suddenly that person might start feeling more stressed more easily. Their fuse might be a little shorter. They might start having outbursts. They might start snapping at the people around them when normally maybe that's not their natural set point, but they can start moving into that direction, and maybe people around them saying, "Hey, you okay?" And they're like, "Yeah, I'm fine." They've got that tension built up, and it might be because the organ itself is getting stuck. And the more stuck it gets, the more angry or irritable they're going to feel, the more frustrated they're going to feel with themselves even, and with the people around them. And so these things have really, real world impacts. Or, somebody gets an infection in the liver, viruses and different things may come through and activate that. It can highly affect mood. It can create, depression. It can create all kinds of these impacts, especially if that gets suppressed and is not worked with or not cultivated. So that's just one example.
Wow. I think the first thing that comes to mind, and I'm sure just to, the everyday individual of, okay, well, what do we process in our livers? People that are drinking a lot, right? And if you're hungover, you're irritable usually. So that might be a good way for people to remember that your liver is responsible for processing that. So, hence the emotional high and the equally opposite low the next day, with whether it's food or, alcohol is probably the biggest one that people experience that low from.
Yeah, that's alcohol is a big one, and then also, to be honest, lots of medications or recreational drugs as well. The body's got to process everything we put in the body. The things we're taking in mentally, emotionally, got to get processed in some way. The liver's going to have a hand in that, but also the physical toxins. And even if somebody's on a medication that is maybe helping them in other ways, I find a lot of times that gets overlooked because the liver is generally going to have to process it in some way from a blood chemistry point of view. And anything that's coming in, even if it's a helpful medication for somebody in their life and they get some benefit, pain medication is a good example. Nobody wants to be in pain, so I understand that. But the liver is going to have to process that. And over time, that might actually create liver issues, and it can actually affect the filtration of the liver. The liver then has a role in regulating blood pressure, cholesterol, getting rid of other toxins. And so that blockage of that filter can actually start creating downstream effects and other issues in the body that you would never necessarily know that's where it's coming from. And so a lot of people that are on a lot of medications, they usually have to get tests depending on the medication to check their liver enzymes to see if they're getting high, because the conventional system knows, hey, if we put too much through here, the liver is not actually going to be able to manage that. And so these are some of the things that maybe people don't think about so much. And then especially on the food front of what we take in, it's got to get processed somewhere. Like on some level, the body's going to have to process every single thing that comes in. And, our bodies are built for that. And it's built to help, pull nutrients, pull things through, keep the good stuff that we want, get rid of the others. So what we continuously put in the body can start to add up. And when the liver gets fatigued because it's being overworked or asked to work overtime too much, and drinking can be a part of that. Vaping, I know, is a big thing for more so maybe the younger crowd at times. Like that's essentially chemical toxicity that has to be processed through the lymph, through the lungs, and then through the liver. That over time, the liver is probably going to have something to say about that, and it's generally not going to be super happy.
So important, as you're saying all that, for people to look at their emotions holistically, right? That it's not just what happened to them on a psychological level that day. It's what did they put in their body that day. And so I think that that's pretty brilliant, to look at it from that standpoint. If the liver's not processing things, it's associated with irritability. I'm really curious, what are the other organs and emotions associated with those?
Yeah, definitely happy to share. These are things I'm thinking of all the time with all my
Yeah, I
patients.
bet.
With the other organs, maybe just before I touch into that, for some people to think about the liver is it's the element of wood in Chinese medicine. And one of the analogies is to think of a big tree. And you want the tree to be flexible, but strong. And that ideally is the energy of the liver, that in a windstorm, if it's healthy and nourished and there's enough water in the tree, for example, and it has enough flexibility, then it can bend and move with life. And that this is where a challenge comes up if people get very rigid and they get so, solid in their viewpoint or their position, and there's no flexibility. When a windstorm comes along, it might break the tree. Like it'll snap and I mean, you could talk about people snapping in, the emotional sense, that sometimes it's that tension that builds up or that congestion through the liver that leads to that. So we want to be flexible. A nice strong tree that withstands many, many years has enough flexibility, but it can still be strong. So, and the liver really leads into the other organs in beautiful ways. So the other one I like to talk about a lot in relationship to the liver is the kidneys. And, the liver and the kidneys have a beautiful dynamic relationship. The energy and the emotion ascribed to the kidneys is fear. And, if we talk about those two emotions, and I'm sure you see this in your work all the time, at a deep level, a lot of people, we're human, there can be a lot of fundamental, deep set fears in our system. A lot of them are unconscious, some of them are conscious, but that energy can really impact the kidneys. And in Chinese medicine, they never really talked about the adrenal system. They didn't name that organ in the literature, but they would talk about the kidney energy, the kidney essence. And so when we look at that, we do kind of include the adrenal system in that. So for anybody listening, adrenal fatigue's become more talked about the last decade for sure. A lot of people are more aware of it. They're working too much, pushing, fast-paced life. They lead to burnout, not enough sleep, maybe not healthy food. That's very taxing for the kidneys. And the way that you can think of this is, I look at the kidneys as your internal savings account in terms of like deep energy. And then the spleen, which we'll talk about next too, the emotion of the spleen it's not an emotion necessarily, but it can be overthinking. In Chinese medicine, the contemplation aspect, but excessive contemplation. Contemplation in a healthy, balanced way, good. It's like meditation. But a lot of times our minds are not in meditation, it's in worry. And it's in like really excessive thought loops, mentally projecting over and over again. That is your internal checking account. And so your spleen is what builds like daily energy. We eat food, we breathe in air, we take in these nutrients. It's actually the role of the spleen to kind of take that and transform it into usable vital force. So if our mind is running overtime all the time, that actually can deplete the energy of the spleen a lot. So we're depleting that internal checking account, your day-to-day spending funds that you need for your daily needs. And then a lot of people end up dipping into their internal savings account, which is the deep essence of the kidney. And so you can only do that for so long before the adrenals burn out and the kidneys kind of burn out. And that's usually when you see more health issues come up. People, start getting into that territory of being incredibly fatigued, starting to borderline autoimmune type conditions or different symptoms or gut stuff or sleep issues. The mental emotional aspect may not be super healthy. So that's often what's going on in the organs. So kidneys can hold a lot of fear. And depending on how we're moving through life, known or unknown, that's going to reside in those tissues. And then the spleen on the worry side is more the mental part of that processing. And so you can start to kind of see how these all fit together.
Yeah, I love that analogy of the checking account and the savings account. I just had an episode that's called Psychological Wealth, and it's all about how full is our mental emotional piggy bank. So I like that. That's a theme that keeps coming up lately. And I think it's interesting to consider how you're saying it's tied to autoimmune conditions. So if you can, I'm curious to hear what comes up in your work as far as autoimmune.
Well, maybe, from an autoimmune point of view, I think it would be helpful if I talk about the lungs, and then I'll link that back together.
Sure.
So the lungs are, one of the other major organ systems in Chinese medicine. That's where like sadness and grief tends to really reside. And so when we start looking at the ones I've mentioned so far, like anger in the liver, fear in the kidneys, overthinking in the spleen, and then grief in the lungs, this is really what I see when those stack up and are unaddressed. And this is so relevant for your work as well, that as human beings, we can only, accumulate so much of that energy that's unmet, unprocessed, unintegrated, not being expressed in some way or not being supported. Those are the building ingredients and the building blocks of illness and autoimmune conditions from my lens. Because what also happens is that, the emotional elements of life, like those are not toxins inherently, but the suppression of those emotions can turn into an impactful, toxic load on the body. They start impacting the body in the same way as maybe physical toxins. So we've got all the physical toxins that can come in, that starts jamming up the organ network, starts jamming up the liver, the kidneys, maybe some debris gets in the lungs and the lymphatic tissue gets a little bit stuck. Once the filtration network, like the detox pathways of the body, start getting blocked, that's usually when somebody starts walking down a road towards autoimmune conditions, because their body can't unload the toxic elements that are coming in. And our bodies are built to detox all the time. But this is part of the modern aspect of my work, is that there's way more toxins that we're exposed to now than we were before. And I feel like the human body is being asked to evolve really, really, really quickly now. And so this is also why I think we're seeing an exponential growth curve of things like autoimmune conditions of all kinds, all the different names of autoimmune conditions. If you're listening, Hashimoto's, rheumatoid arthritis, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, irritable bowel issues, Crohn's, colitis, like all of these things are getting lumped into, the we don't know category from a conventional point of view. And it's just some kind of autoimmune, lupus is another example. And so when I think about this, it's like, where did this begin in the body? It's not like we just woke up one day and suddenly somebody's got this issue for no reason. That when we kind of reverse engineer, you start looking at, when did things stop, being able to clear the system? When did the body stop being able to detox properly, both from an emotional point of view and a physical point of view, because they can both have the same impact. So for people that have had a lot of unprocessed grief, they tend to develop different lung issues, recurrent bronchitis, asthma even, or they just can't take a full breath and their body starts getting really stuck, and that impacts their circulation. And when circulation's impacted, all kinds of different things start getting set off, and even inflammatory conditions will start creeping up just generally. And then if the liver's stuck and the adrenals are burnt out and somebody's carrying so much fear, you can really start to see the breakdown of the physiological, natural processes of what your body's trying to do. And then everything gets harder. And when that starts happening, the immune system and the nervous system start looking at, hey, we got to take more steps here. We're going to have to increase the level of alarm in the system, also known as inflammation. And that is actually what starts building different conditions, like I named the different diagnostic criteria, because the body's been inflamed for too long. And so those very real emotions that are stuck in the body, if we look at them that way, are never really felt or worked with, that actually starts impacting the physical organ function. And so I don't believe autoimmune conditions are a mistake by the body at all. Like the body has so much wisdom. It doesn't make mistakes. Nature doesn't make a mistake. So the body doesn't lie, and that's what I've learned over many years of being in the clinic. When I'm listening to people's bodies, that's actually telling me the truth of what's going on there.
Yeah. I really like that you're saying you look at the physical symptoms as a teacher, as a signal, as something to point towards a deeper, either emotional or, environmental toxin that's contributing to whatever the internal discomfort is.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where the deeper questions come up in some of my sessions. And then that helps inform what kind of treatment I'm needing to do. So if somebody's coming in with, asthma, for example, I'll ask them all about it. I'll check on the history, but then I'll ask, where do you live? Where did you grow up? Did you ever live in a house with mold in it? That could be the reason they have asthma in my, professional lens. Also, I'll start asking about loss and, maybe things that they've been through as a kid or as a child, or even in their adult years. Maybe they lost somebody very close to them, or maybe they haven't processed that heartbreak or a relationship ending, or they lost a pet that they were so busy in their life and career and overwhelmed, and they had all these other things they're working on that they never really stopped to kind of process the grief of that loss. And then suddenly they keep getting colds and flu, or they develop more asthma. I've seen that show up a lot in adults as, adult onset asthma or exercise induced asthma. That tells me there's too much toxins, too many, elements of emotional debris that may be in the lungs, and they may just need to process quite a bit of grief through doing work, counseling, therapy, psychotherapy. Maybe they need more time in nature. Maybe they need to see somebody like me to kind of ask these questions that then it brings it to light. And maybe it's a bit of both. Maybe they've been exposed to molds and that's really impacted their lung function, and it's actually brought their mood down and they can't breathe properly, and their circulation's impacted from lack of oxygen, exchange in the body in addition to maybe some grief or some loss that hasn't really been addressed, or they haven't really found an outlet or felt enough support to go into something like that, then, oh yeah, we want to unpack those layers, because when we start doing that, they'll start feeling better. So I might be helping them detox with specific remedies if I'm, finding that the history is matching up with like mold exposure, or maybe, some of the people I've worked with, like firemen, frontline, service people that got like smoke, inhalation, or, chemical exposures, different things through workplace hazards. And now their lungs are not doing so good. So I might develop a detox regimen to clear the lymph, to, clear out the lungs physically, to really try and lighten the load. And what's interesting about that is when we start doing that, sometimes they have a lot of grief that comes up at the same time, because we're actually working on that organ system, and they come back and say, Kevin, that remedy you made for me, that herbal formula, whatever it was, I was crying a lot. Why was that? So, well, you must have some unprocessed grief and sadness that needed to get worked on and felt and just experienced. And then they say, oh, no, I feel like I can breathe deeply finally for the first time in a decade. And it's all of that together.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And as you're saying that, I'm reflecting in my work that it's a bit the opposite. So something will come up emotionally and there will be this big psychological breakthrough, and then there will be physical release. Like they'll report feeling lighter. That's the most common thing I hear. And I've experienced that too as a client in therapy, feeling physically lighter and noticing less pain if there was pain. So it's amazing to see that reciprocal relationship.
Yeah, they're kind of one and the same. And again, the Chinese medicine teaching, it's so poetic and beautiful that these things can't be separated. And even conventional medicine and modern thought, it's starting to be understood, even a lot of the research on irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, that it's largely psychosomatic. And it doesn't mean to say somebody, it's like, oh, it's all in your head. What it means, and what I mean by that, is there's often a lot of unprocessed emotions that are physically impacting the body. And when people start going in or getting the right support for that, their physical body starts to respond. Their body can actually start repairing and healing these pieces. And, and even to go further into some of the thought process, I see this a lot with beliefs that people have about themselves. And it's often unconscious, and sometimes it's conscious, that they believe they're not good enough, or they believe that they are always making mistakes, that, people don't like them, or there's a lot of judgment or self-criticism or external criticism, and they start turning that energy in on themselves quite a bit. And I could even see this with like injuries. And I had that narrative myself. If we go back to my knee for a moment, I injured my right knee playing hockey and other sports like 5 times, pretty severely each time. And I remember thinking around that time, after, 2 or 3 times, it was like, stupid knee. Like, why does this keep happening? And almost like really blaming my knee for some kind of inherent weakness. And that thought process, do you think that was helpful for my knee to heal? No. And when I think about, my kids, I use as references a lot, and it's taught me a lot being a parent. I would never speak to my son that way. Like if he injured himself, I wouldn't be like, hey, what's the matter with you? I know some parents do that. I'm not trying to judge. This is where we need to be really mindful, but our self-talk towards our bodies. So after 3 injuries, 4 injuries, 5 injuries, I lost so much confidence in my knee, but really I think my knee probably lost confidence in me, because what I was doing to my system, that kept putting myself in scenarios where, yeah, I get it, things happen. But I do think there was some really deep lessons for me to learn around that how we feel about our body parts individually, places of injury, or even places where you're just harsh on yourself, or society's judging, that can actually create autoimmune conditions within the system, because we're turning the energy back in on ourselves. And so you can imagine if my knee is, as an example, is like a little kid, and I tell that little kid, or in this case, my knee, over and over again, that they're bad, they're weak, what's the matter with you? They will have very real developmental impact from that in their nervous system, and that shows up in their lives and their relationships. And for me physically, like that wouldn't help my knee become strong again. It would it would actually keep perpetuating that same loop. So I like thinking about our bodies that way, is how are we speaking to ourselves? How are we speaking or, viewing, especially, physical attributes and things like that? It's a big one in society. And I think this is kind of a sneaky way that autoimmune conditions get going, is like that internal network is just getting hit again and again, consciously and unconsciously, by our own hand. And so we have a lot of power in being able to turn these things around once we understand.
Yeah. And I like how you say we have a lot of power, because that's what comes to mind when you're sharing this with me, that there's so much empowerment to be experienced from recognizing that what we say to ourselves can become reality. Because I think the defeatist mentality is what's most popular. And again, that's not to judge or to shame. It's just, yeah, it's easy to be like, stupid knee. Like, I have a pain in my wrist, but I've been struggling with it for a couple months, and I'm guilty of that. Like, as soon as you said it, I was thinking, yeah, I've been thinking like, stupid wrist. What's wrong with it? And yeah, that's a great way to look at not only how you're talking to your inner self, like your actual body parts. And that's, a whole other rabbit hole of body talk and body image.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that I like to get curious about for myself and for others and patients that I'm working with, when you have a symptom, it's just information. Your body is communicating information. It's a data point. So it's inviting us to look at something. And it could be a repetitive, strain thing. It could be an emotional thing. I've experienced very physical symptoms completely from a mentally emotional point of view. And it'll continue to get louder usually until we slow down and listen enough to kind of unpack what it is. And, from my mindset, the way I was raised, the way I was taught, more conventional medicine, Western medicine, recurrent injury it's a muscle issue or it's a ligament issue. Like it's just physical. But what I've also seen, because I've worked with pro athletes and all kinds of people from all kinds of walks of life, that anything recurrent, especially, there is always an energetic and emotional component there. There's something being invited to look at how we're living, how we're thinking, and around that time when I kept injuring my knees, I had a fundamental belief that I wasn't good enough as an athlete to play at the level that I was playing. Like I didn't have that belief in myself. I had a serious lack of confidence for lots of different reasons, I think, but that was like part of my journey. And so it's interesting what we manifest sometimes in physicality based on what the belief system is. And I could share 1,000 stories about me personally and, different outcomes and things I've seen with patients where it was something that they were wanting to shift in their life, but they didn't know how. And in some cases, it wasn't even fully conscious, and they'll find a way to create a scenario to like get out of something. But if we're not mindful, it's often like a painful experience that then it gets the impact or it gets the change we want. It just may not be how we want it because we're not being conscious of it. So there's a lot of connectivity around that.
Yeah, everyone's quote unquote rock bottom is different. Like how much pain and for how long do you want to be feeling that way before we say like, okay, rather than being mad at that part of my body or my mind, I'm going to be friends with it and get to know it and be curious about it.
Yeah, what's it telling me? When I'm feeling what's the information that's trying to be communicated? Am I listening? And so especially any persistent ailments, that we get taught of symptoms are bad, we got to get rid of them. I think this is part of the other issue with autoimmune conditions is that in North America anyway, my view is that so many people have been taught that you got to get rid of symptoms at all costs. If you get a fever, get rid of it. If you're congested, get rid of it. If you have pain somewhere, take a pill and just get rid of it. But the challenge is what we're saying to the body is, I'm not listening to you. I'm going to suppress the communication that you're telling me. In a lot of cases, it's slow down. You need some rest, take some time off. And if that's not convenient, because sometimes the communicated information is not convenient, then we'll push it away, suppress it, shove it down. That is what leads to deeper illness. I've seen it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times where we get into the reverse engineering of how an illness came to be. There's a lot of these patterns that tend to be in somebody's past that they did not stop to listen, and they just use their willpower and society programming to override the wisdom of the body. And eventually the body has to increase its communication. And that can be in the form of health issues. It's trying to get us to listen to something.
Yeah. And I think you use the word willpower. And I think willpower and strength have been wrongly associated with suppressing and shoving away. Like, oh, she's so strong. She got through that. And it's like, well, fabulous. But what did that actually look like? Did getting through it mean facing it and processing it? Or it meant putting it on a shelf and then, one day the closet explodes?
Exactly. This is why we're so busy. There's just such an accumulative dynamic, and gratefully as well, a lot of the people that are
100%.
seeing us, they're working on their stuff, and it's not always easy work to do. And I have so much compassion for anybody that is willing to take that leap or step forward with some courage to unpack some of these things that, like, their cup's just gotten too full. And they do need to offload that. And you mentioned it earlier too, that they feel lighter as a result of doing some of that work. And then it does impact the physical body. Like, absolutely what we do mentally, emotionally will always trickle down to the physical. And sometimes we got to work at it for a little while to get enough of that depth sorted out. So the body will respond. And sometimes, we just got to stick with it long enough. It's not like going to the gym. Well, maybe it is like going to the gym. If you do a workout or two, you might feel good, but is that going to build long-term strength over time? Or can we make it a way of life to regularly visit some of these places and listen to our bodies more?
Yeah. To make meaningful changes so that it's just maintenance rather than go. Oh my God, I'm done. I need a whole, regroup, rehab, and then go. And then back to the drawing board again, like somehow integrating it to be feasible maintenance.
Yeah. Well, and for all the car enthusiasts out there, sometimes I have 100 analogies a day, but if we're a race car and you're going around the track and you never take a pit stop, that's going to catch up with you. And so many people wait until the wheels are literally falling off before they'll take a pause or get some support or ask for some help. And the more regularly we do that, the better the performance is going to be, the more longevity we're going to have, the better quality of life of what we're able to experience mentally, emotionally, and physically. And so I'm always kind of keeping track of that stuff for myself. Oh, I feel like I need a pit stop. Who can I get some support from? Let's do a couple sessions. And what do I need? What's my body, my vessel need for maintenance? Maybe I need some acupuncture. I love acupuncture for all of these things. Maybe I need some hands-on work, some massage or visceral manipulation or osteopathy or something where the physical body needs connection and attention in different ways too, not just the mentally emotional part. It's all relevant and they all support one another. And other times I do need like a counseling session or, reach out to a coach or a friend or something that can help listen or help guide through a challenging point that I may be having. And then I feel better after, and then I'm, more creative, more intuitive, and I'm more effective in my work. So it does take regular maintenance, but we don't have to wait until bad.
Exactly. Yeah. And I like that you're sharing that you're practicing what you're preaching. And I like to do the same, that, I'm a therapist, but making it known that I also go to therapy and that, I also go see a chiropractor or get acupuncture. And I feel like sometimes there's an illusion that if we're sitting in these seats of delivering the service that we're perfect. And that's of course not true.
No,
just not true.
not true at all. I was having this conversation earlier today. And I've had it many times in different ways. Like anybody that wants to make an impact, do a podcast, step out and lead in some way and share and speak to things in society and, try and be a guiding light. We've often been through all of those things ourselves and it continues. Leadership can be really humbling. It can be challenging because the world is often going to say, oh, you want to step out and make an impact? Let's test some of these pieces. And so this is where like the regular check-ins, the regular work really pays off. And, I know from a monetary standpoint, like, we got to pay for these things. Even in Canada, we have healthcare that's looked after in some ways, but a lot of the other things aren't. And I usually like to ask people, like, what do you want to invest in? And what's more important to invest in than your own health, your own, quality of life and quantity of life too, so that you can be really great with your kids. And that you can make an impact in your work or your creativity can flourish. And all of that can be supported beautifully through doing regular check-ins, regular support. And then the sky is the limit. So this is a non-negotiable for me that I invest in my health as much or even more than some of my patients do. And, I want to stay healthy. And that's also why I believe I am healthy. It's not just random or chance or circumstance. And I know there's lots of things out of our control as human beings. However, the things that we can invest in, bodies being one of them, minds being another, I don't think there's a better place to invest, really.
No, absolutely. And I think taking it as seriously as that, and then making the steps and investing in ways that feel meaningful, and you start to see change. And then I'm sure your clients start to notice things about themselves, and that's reinforcing like, oh, hang on, this works. And it actually feels good to take care of myself. That's ultimately the goal, right, of all of this work, is getting them and getting ourselves to the point where it feels good to slow down and take care of yourself, rather than it feeling like a luxury or a nuisance or something that you're not even thinking about it. And as I'm saying all that, I'm very curious, what are some of the interventions you use?
Yeah, certainly. Definitely totally biased. Love acupuncture. I acupuncture myself. I do trades with other practitioners here locally where we can work on each other. And I find that beautifully supportive. And I find acupuncture for me is one of the best, like, de-stressing treatments. I usually just go, so deep. My body feels super reset, good for emotions, good for the physical body, great for the immune system, great for circulation, great for decreasing inflammation. So there's a plug to all the acupuncturists of the world. Thank you. And then I'm a big fan of herbal medicine, and I really also got into homeopathy and what the term is called homotoxicology. And what that means is like the detox of the human body. And so we use different remedies. We build different remedies to be very targeted to different organ systems. So I'll give people remedies and tinctures and things for like detoxing the liver, for example, or working on the lymphatic system, or giving support to the kidneys. And depending on what somebody has going on, I'm making custom formulations with organ systems in mind of the places that I believe are the root cause of their issue, or leading to some of the imbalance. And I know those systems need support in some way. So sometimes we'll do that through acupuncture and herbal medicine. A lot of my work over the years has really started to focus in on toxins and, detoxing those pathways of the body. Like I mentioned, lymphatics, liver, kidneys, these are all really important key filtration systems of the body. And I see them overwhelmed more now than ever in any point in my career. And so that's usually where I'm starting with a lot of patients is, what do they need to get those pathways open? Then as we get them open, we get them up and running, they're starting to feel better. What are the layers underneath? And so I'm often making remedies to, clear or neutralize or help integrate like past infections or things that they've come across in terms of exposure to different toxins. How can we, lift some of that material up and out of the body? And we'll go through a lot of different layers, kind of like an onion, we start peeling those layers back. I do often refer out as well, not just some of the in-house work that we do around toxins, because there's testing that I do in the clinic. I've got online programs and groups that I'm running right now. One's called the Vitality Collective, and I give everybody a little pulse electromagnetic field device, and we've got meridian protocols that are very strategically targeted to those organ systems that we're talking about. And so we'll kind of take everybody through a bunch of those layers so that their body can actually, like mentally and emotionally too, but also physically lighten the load of all the toxins that have built up over time. Because I find if we do that work properly, people get tremendous success with whatever their health issues are, their illnesses, their autoimmune conditions start turning around. They come off of medications that maybe they don't need anymore because they're feeling good and their inflammation is down. So maybe they're not taking as many painkillers, which again is better for the gut, better for the organs. And you see this beautiful momentum start to snowball. And sometimes it just takes like one of these elements to kickstart the body. And I will refer out to osteopathy. I know some great body workers here locally. I do refer out to counseling, psychotherapy, different modalities where I'm feeling, hey, you might need some somatic therapy based on what you've shared. And you see all these things going on in the nervous system. Let's start to unwind that. Or what practitioner, I love kind of matchmaking with clients in that way of it takes a team. And I have a lot of skill sets. I know I can, go really deep with people and help clear, but I also know they might need other pieces that are maybe not in my zone of genius fully or only partially. And if I know somebody that's better for the job, I'm the first person to refer because I can also see the beautiful impact, and somebody may need an adjustment from a chiropractor or something. And I'm going to do all this detox over here. And I'll say, hey, if you could go get some of that treatment also, it's going to help everything we're doing, and vice versa. And then, they kind of come back in, and now we're making progress because you really start to see the other professions like come alive where they can actually be very supportive of each other. And so, my key zone is kind of around detoxing organ systems and meridians and viruses and bacteria and chemicals and all that kind of stuff. You need to get rid of some parasites. I'm your guy. And also unpacking the deeper stuff too. Sometimes there's some energetic entanglements and just, past experiences people have had that they're still dragging them around, but they don't know it. And so, we've got a lot of skills and tools to be able to offload. And, body talks, I'm a fan of that. One of the practitioners I get to work with in the clinic, and a good friend of mine, Pam, here locally, I send people to her as well because I know there's more to be seen here. There's something that's not being illuminated or something that's get overlooked. I'm going to work on your organ systems. Let's do that. But also go into that, looking at the psyche, the nervous system. Maybe there's some other dynamics that are alive that just haven't been brought into the room yet. And so let's do that. Go see this person.
That must build so much trust amongst your clients to know that you are not someone that's claiming to be this all-knowing being, and you're saying, okay, there are other specialists out there, let's work together. I mean, that's part of the reason I have people like you on my podcast. So you talked about these 3 main organs. Are there any more organs you'd like to share about?
Yeah, I think the last one is the heart. So again, just for a recap, liver, anger, kidneys, fear, spleen is overthinking, lungs more like grief and sadness, the heart. The heart's the last one that we didn't really talk about too much. And it's interesting, the emotion connected with the heart is joy, is maybe the best translation. And I remember asking my teachers, what's wrong with that? Like that seems good. But there can be overjoy, or there can be people that are almost in that like manic type pattern where they're really on all the time, and it's overdoing it, and it's like over exuberance is maybe the word that comes up there. But one of the patterns that can show up here is lack of joy, where they're sort of despondent, maybe a little bit listless. And, we talk about the Shen being through the eyes. In Chinese medicine, the Shen is the spirit, and the Shen is housed in the heart. And so when we look at that, there's a prognosis teaching around that in Chinese medicine, that you look in the eyes to see the quality of the spirit. And that can actually inform you about the direction somebody's going in. And a lot of times we'll call it lack of spirit or lackluster spirit. There's always different, aspects of terminology for that. But you can see that through the eyes, and it can often tell you about what's going on with the heart. If somebody comes in and they're deeply heartbroken, you can see it in their eyes. There's a particular quality there, and maybe they have not felt a lot of joy or happiness for some time, or they've been through a loss, and all of those things can impact our hearts. And in terms of testing in the clinic, over the many years I've done meridian testing, there'll sometimes be a client that comes in and I'm testing all their organ systems and they're all good, except for maybe the heart is low. And it's testing out that it's resonant, quite lower. The voltage is not what it should be coming through. We're electromagnetic beings. And I might just check in and ask, like, how's your heart doing? Have you been through anything lately? And sometimes they'll just immediately, burst into tears that maybe they've lost a partner, or they just went through a breakup, the week or two prior, and they're heartbroken. And I'll literally see it on the voltage of the heart meridian itself, that it is definitely being impacted in that way from the mentally emotional strain of that, or the heartbreaking nature of sometimes being human. And then you'll see it on the other side where somebody comes in and they're in love, or, they're in that space and their heart's just beaming and their eyes are so alive with so much spirit. There's a brightness there. There's a vitality that's coming through, and you can tell, oh, your heart is lit up right now. And so it's all very much connected, and one flows into the next. I love the heart as an organ network in the system, because it's so much more than, it's just like this pump that I think a lot of us were taught, that there's an energetic vortex in there that is really informing and interacting with our environments and producing energy and producing voltage, and, having us have these experiences as a human. And there's a way to create harmony there too. There's, acupuncture points you can do for the heart. There's acupuncture points that you can do for any of the organ systems, especially if there's some imbalance there, physically or otherwise, that it can help you bring it back into more harmony.
That's amazing that you're able to measure the voltage of that, and then to see through their eyes, but then to have it verified through that system that, oh yeah, they're either overjoyed or lacking a lot of joy. And I love that you're finishing with the heart, because I feel like it's very symbolic. And these little quirky sayings exist for a reason, like being heartbroken. Where does that come from ultimately? It comes from this ancient wisdom. That's pretty amazing.
Does. Yeah, everything's connected back to the heart. I've felt that for a long period of time. And we used to run a retreat series, my dear friend Courtney and I, called Collective Hearts. And we would really dive in and focus on the heart and focus on the immense depth that's there, and like how much we can feel, and that the heart actually holds tons of memory and much more, as we discover scientifically, Heart Math Institute, HRV, all these other cool things to kind of track how we interact with ourselves in the environment. And the root of many things comes down to the hearts, and there can be a lot there to unpack sometimes on the health front. And so I find a lot of people overlook that place. There might be a lot of things that they're holding that they don't know about. And so I'd invite everybody to check in with your heart more regularly, just see what it needs, see if it's communicating to you. And one of my favorite books is The Alchemist, and they talk about the heart a lot in that book, that, if you stop listening to your heart, eventually it'll stop speaking to you. And I feel like that's when, as humans, we can get off track, and there's more of that heartbreak sort of soul level illness, if we can even, term it that way. But when we check in with our heart regularly, oh yeah, there's massive amounts of vitality and joy that can be unlocked there. So I love the heart.
Yeah. And you're right. If we don't listen to it, then it'll stop speaking to us. I like that, because the word I use is emotionally muted. So if we think of our emotions as on this grand scale, and then when we're going through something, the scale just gets like squished. And so our highs are less high and our lows are also less low. We're kind of this numb individual. And that's what came to mind when you said that the heart will stop speaking to you. In other words, you're kind of out of touch with any type of emotion at that point.
Absolutely. Well, and all these sayings, living a heart-led life, or, having courage like the heart of a lion. And there's all of these different layers, I think, from lots of different cultures, that they knew the significance of what was here, and, how we're in proximity with each other. You can feel somebody's heart frequency, and we may not know it consciously, but we can. And, that around animals and, horses and things like that. The horse world, like, they have a giant heart field. And I think that's why a lot of people love being around horses, is that, being enveloped into that beautiful heart spectrum can be really healing. So, yeah, so much.
Is that
there.
just because they have such big hearts, or is that specific to horses?
To my knowledge, it's a big body. Horse is a big animal. Yeah. They got a big heart in there. And so physically, the electromagnetic spectrum of the voltage that can get created through a giant heart like that is immense. And I know there's a lot more, to it on the energetic levels and the intelligence of a lot of these, beautiful creatures that we get to be around. When you look them in the eyes, there's deep wisdom there. And so I feel like that's often being transmuted through the heart spectrum. And this is maybe one of the things I love about animals, and like dogs. I'm a big dog lover. I love all creatures, but particularly fond of dogs. That, the unconditional love from many, many dogs is just, it's special. It's something else. And I believe like their heart spectrum is just so pure that when we're around those animals, like they can help us regulate back to a state of balance and bring us back to our hearts. And this is, I think, why they use a lot of dogs and different animals in hospital settings and in therapy settings, because it can actually help regulate. And, they're doing a lot more of this with children with, learning disabilities or, spectrum disorders and autism and many, many other things. And you find like actually so many applications where everybody's just generally happier if there's animals around. Like there's something in that. And I feel like maybe because the animals, they're not judging us, perhaps. Maybe they are in their secret world, but there's kind of more of that unconditional, compassionate nature that they're not, saying different things to us that could be hurtful or mean or anything. They're just present. And they can help us be present. And I feel like that's when we're most in our hearts, is when we're deeply present.
We need to learn how to love ourselves the way that dogs love us. That is definitely what we need to do, because you're right. It's that co-regulation. If you're with someone whose presence is really too anxious of an energy, then you might start to feel anxious, and vice versa. So we definitely emulate and pick up on whatever vibration we're around, whether we know it or not. So that's interesting. I like how you tie that to relationship to animals. It's 100% true. To wrap up, if you could share one simple but powerful practice from traditional Chinese medicine / progressive Chinese medicine to leave listeners with that they could integrate in their day-to-day lives, what would it be?
What's coming through is to be more compassionate with ourselves and more gentle with ourselves and gentle with each other. And maybe I am just feeling the dogs when you come in. Imagine if we greeted each other with that level of excitement and that level of joy to come through, that, joy is a tremendous antidote to like so many illnesses where we need to laugh more. And there's a deep connection of laughter and joy directly to the heart. So that's what I would say. Pay attention to the heart more, and what's your daily level of joy. And it's not that we have to go through every day being incredibly happy, but I find if we even just bring attention to that and we have more compassion for ourselves, we're going to be a little bit easier on our hearts. And that may make it a little bit easier to feel joy and to find it in our lives, or to see it in scenarios where maybe we're not allowing ourselves to see it, but it's right there. That could take a lot of weight off of all of us. And if we take some of that weight off of our chests and our hearts and allow a bit more joy through, a bit more play, a bit more laughter, even in the faces of adversity and challenging things, all of the other organs are going to experience more energy, more vitality, and we'll come back into a state of harmony.
Beautiful answer. Thank you so much for being here, Kevin. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for being in the flow with me. This has been, super fun. Thanks everybody for listening, and what a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening. If you're enjoying the podcast, I invite you to participate in a Growth Zone Challenge. I invite you to take a moment, a second, a gap in your day right now and share this episode with 2 other people. Thank you for minding the gaps with me. I'll see you next time on the journey out of our comfort zones and into our growth zones.